Hey everybody, today we're going to talk coronavirus. Now, I didn't know if I was going to make this video or not, but with everything that's been happening, I figured I might as well put my voice out there and maybe it could be of help. Here's what I want to talk about. Number one, if your panic level is up here, you're going to need to bring that down a little bit. But if you are complacent and your level's down here, I'm going to need you to come up a little bit more. Okay, we need to all meet kind of somewhere in this middle, because actually both of you are making this worse. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of different things, and so one of the things I want to address is maybe try to approach this kind of from the medical view, and then look at it sort of from a public health view. And then I want to talk a little bit about kind of the benefit of of everything being canceled, right? All this canceling that's happening, because what you're hearing a lot is beating the curve. Okay, so what does that mean? And so we're going to talk about that today. First and foremost, I'm not a medical doctor. I am not an infectious health personnel. But if you know a little bit about me or my channel, you know that I am a biologist. And so I'm going to give you my best perspective on this. And I'm going to get into a few fields that, again, I'm not an expert in, but I have read those. And so I'm going to always defer to what that information is, what the data is. I'm very data driven. Okay. So we're going to talk about some of those things. So let's get started. First things first, let's do a little bit about coronavirus. Okay. Now, here's the thing. If you've done any reading, you know that we don't have all the data yet. What we're basically looking at is information based on other coronaviruses. Okay, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And based on some of this estimate data that's coming out of different countries. Okay, so we will not have any hard data sets until this is all done with. Okay, we're working with the best numbers that we have. Now, with that being said, this is not like a guess, right? The medical community is not out there just guessing at these things. They have a really good framework to work with. So when they put out data, I pay very close attention to that. It is not anything to just say, oh, I'm just going to dismiss this. They don't know what they're talking about. No, they do. Okay. But they also are working with limited data as well. Okay. So I'm always going to, like I said, I'm always going to defer to that. I'm a data driven guy. Okay. So what about coronavirus? Well, most of you guys already know. It is a type of virus. There's lots of different coronaviruses out there that cause common colds and stuff of that nature. Is this the same as all the other colds? Well, no. All of these are all very different. SARS, the MERS, all of those are different coronaviruses. This is just a new one. And so with this new one comes a few different things. You know, the same way we saw SARS was different than all the other coronas. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that maybe a little bit later on. Okay. The other thing that I hear a lot is, well, it's the same as the flu. It's just like getting the flu. Sort of. Okay. Sort of. Yes and no. The flu is nothing to be dismissed. It kills thousands of people every single year. And we have vaccines for it, right? But there are apparently some differences that we're seeing, that the coronavirus is a little bit different than the flu. But yes, I get that it is similar. Okay. But why are we kind of panicking, freaking out? Well, let's talk about why we're having to do the things that we're doing. Okay, so let's talk about panicking for a second. So if you're out there panicking, you're freaking everyone out. You've really got to stop. Whenever people panic, we make terrible decisions. We don't know how to react, and it just kind of fuels a lot of these problems, right? People are going out buying toilet paper like crazy, and I'm over here wondering, if you need that much toilet paper, you might have some other issues you need to get checked out, right? And not to make light of it, but some of this panic buying, I don't think is necessary, right? Again, you know me, I'm also prepping for a lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff we already have, but some of this is getting pretty ridiculous, okay? On the flip side of that, if you are complacent, you could be making this just as bad, because a lot of complacent people don't take directions as to what we can do to make these things better, because they're dismissing everything. And so what can end up happening is, by not following some of these recommendations, which are very simple to do, you could be the one spreading this virus and actually making it worse. Okay. And so both of those parties, the public freaking, the public just freaking out over here, and those that don't give a crap or don't think it's a big deal, y'all are both making this thing worse, okay? Again, this is my opinion. And so we've got to find this middle ground, because if we're all in this together and we all do the things that we're supposed to be practicing, this could go away really quickly, okay? But we'll talk about that problem in just a little bit, okay? All right, so let's look at it from kind of a medical viewpoint, okay? All my doctor viewers out there, if you want to chime in if I screw something up, by all means, please do so. So if we look at just say the symptoms of coronavirus, I'm not going to go into them. You can look those up on the CDC website. Symptoms are for most people very manageable. Obviously, most people are surviving and recovering. It sounds like it sucks, right? Just like the flu sucks when you get it. It is contagious. Some estimates are showing that it's a little bit more contagious. And when I say a little bit more, we're talking, the last data set I looked at was 3 people per 1 person infected. We could change that though, and that's going to be different for so many different reasons, right? But it does seem that it could be transmitted a little bit easier than the flu, and there could be a lot of reasons for that that we'll mention later on. But medically, I suspect that as a doctor, if you were to just read a paper on COVID-19, okay, nothing too crazy. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some severe issues with some of the population, say elderly or those that are immunocompromised and all of that, but manageable, right? And so from that viewpoint, awesome, easy peasy. Let's take another step forward though, and kind of move this medical viewpoint, all the stuff that we're looking at with, how COVID works and all this, or the coronavirus works, at least to COVID-19, all this stuff. Let's push that aside for just a second. Public health, that's the problem we're running into. And the problem is people. We are the ones that spread it. If you're not following protocol, if you're not following all of these, quarantines, this is where the problem is. Now, there's kind of two areas that I like to look at in this. Number one, people that don't know they're infected, spreading it. Okay, there's not a lot that I can say is about that, other than if you were in these areas that have high incidence, you should be aware of that and kind of self-quarantine and be cautious about where you're going, right? And so those people, they just don't know, okay? So I can't be too mad at them at that, okay? But that's a huge part of this, is you're spreading that out. And so one of the things with COVID that's kind of different is the time out before you start showing symptoms can be pretty far. And so what that means is before you're even showing symptoms, you could be spreading this virus, right? And so you could be going to a lot of locations thinking, hey, I'm okay, but I just sneezed or coughed on an area and now I just infected other people, okay? You can do that with flu too, but flu, you tend to be fairly symptomatic relatively quickly. Not everyone, okay? There's not any one size fits all for this, okay? But that seems to be a little bit shorter. Most people kind of know, and so that helps us a little bit, at least with flu. But COVID, we've seen that, well, there might be some issues with that. So that's another issue. The other part is people that just ignore everything. Oh, it's just a cold, or I feel fine. It's a little illness. I'll be all right. And then you go out and you're spreading this. And so I think really what this, for me, is looking at how we as people ignore a lot of this stuff. I mean, think of how many people that come into work sick or go to school sick. There's a lot of us out there that have done that at least once. I'm guilty of that as well. And so when something like this comes into play and no one's taking it seriously, we could have really fast spread very easily. And that's something that we don't want to do. So from a public health issue, people are the problem. And so now what we are having to deal with is a potential overload, because people aren't following some of this advice of, washing your hands, staying a social distancing. We'll talk about all that. And so what we're seeing right now is this. All the canceling that's going on, what they're trying to do is to what they call beat the curve. And you've probably seen this chart out where if we get a lot of infections of people really quickly, we can potentially overload the medical community. Okay, so what's going on here? Okay, so even though most people are not going to be symptomatic or have mild symptoms, we're not the ones that are going to overload the system, because right now we're playing a numbers game, right? So let's think about this. If we are looking at elderly, that's still a pretty good chunk of our population. If we're spreading this and we just let it run rampant, they're going to have to go to the hospital. So if you're immunocompromised, you're elderly, you have lung issues, you're going to be in the hospital. And so now that hospital is overloaded with so many people. And we're seeing that in other countries. And so now what happens when there is a car accident and people need to go in to these hospitals? What happens when now there is an emergency, maybe with your child or another family member that's not even flu or COVID related, but the hospitals are overran? Okay, that's what we're trying to beat. Okay, the idea, of course, is if we can slow this down, we can stretch it out so that not everybody's getting sick at the same time. And as a result, this will disappear relatively quickly, right? The other thing that we have to think about is, well, what happens when the medical personnel gets sick? Okay, if your family doctor gets ill, they can't come into work. What about when some of those nurses disappear because they're at home quarantined as well? And so we're trying to play this kind of balancing act, right? And so it is a numbers game. So right now, if you just look at numbers, the numbers of death of COVID compared to flu, they're not even close, right? Flu is way higher, okay? So that's something we still have to watch out with. What they're attempting to do is, because we don't have any vaccines, is we have to stop the spread so that we can keep those numbers low. Because if this spreads, we could see numbers get up very, very high very, very quickly. And we've seen this in other countries. We've also seen what works in other countries. And it's exactly what you're seeing now. And that is, we're canceling things so that groups of people can't get together, because then it makes it easier for this stuff to be transmitted from person to person to person. Because again, the more tightly compacted everyone is, the easier it is. One person sneezes, and guess what? You just infected everyone around you, right? And so this is where social distancing comes into play. This is the thing that I look at. You can still go to the grocery store. You can still go out and do things, right? You can go to the gym. You can go outside walking around. You can go do stuff. But you have to be cautious. You got to hand wash. You got to make sure to keep your distance. Because again, if someone is ill, but they're, 6 feet away from you, your chances of getting sick are really, really low, okay? As I said, the reason we're getting stuff canceled is because if there's a big event, people are still going to go, right? And so we can't make these personal decisions. And so because of that, the city government, the state government are having to cancel everything because we as humans sometimes can't look beyond those, we can't, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. We can't look long term, I guess. We're like, oh, I'll go, I'll be fine. When in actuality, we don't know. We don't know that you're going to be fine. And so sometimes, we get used to some of these issues of, oh, it's a bad flu season, or oh, that's swine flu. Nothing happened last time. Everything was fine, right? And so we run into this problem of we don't think it's a threat, when in actuality it is. And it may not be a threat to you personally, but that's not the goal here, right? We're trying to do a couple of things. Like I said, we're trying to keep the hospitals from being overloaded, and we're trying to prevent a lot of elderly death. Again, a lot of elderly death. So not only do they have to worry about flu, now they've got to worry about this, right? And so we don't want to panic, right? We don't want to panic, but we do want to use caution, right? We can't be complacent in this. It's our civic duty to not be complacent. It's also our civic duty not to be freaking out, okay? Here's one of my long-term concerns with this, is that we are going to take all these measures and we are going to see that drop in numbers, and that's going to be awesome because we did what we should have done. But then after that time has passed, here's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about people saying, see, it went away. We shouldn't have canceled all of that stuff. And so now when next time something like this happens, we're going to be less likely to do that. That's my concern, is that people are going to look back and say, oh, see, it wasn't a big deal. We overreacted, and so we're not going to cancel all that stuff like we did last time. I think that's a faulty way of thinking. When you look at past epidemics, or pandemics or whatever, this is a major, way to curtail the amount of people getting infected by so many different diseases, flu included. We should be doing this every flu season as well. But again, complacency causes us to increase some of those numbers. So the take-home message here is we don't need to be panicking. We don't need to be complacent either. Yeah, you might get it and be perfectly fine, but that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about overloading medical systems. We're worried about more people getting infected constantly. Kind of the frightening thing to me is we have barely done any test, which means that there's a lot of people out there that are infected that don't know it yet, and they could be spreading it unknowingly, okay? And so this is kind of where I think a lot of public health officials are kind of really trying to pull the reins in on this and cancel stuff and tell people to, keep your distance, because we don't know the true numbers yet. They're going to go up. And so what that means is the more people that are infected, we're going to see the more people that probably die from this, okay? It's all numbers. 10% of a population, okay, well, if your population's 20, that's not that many people, okay? So 20 people infected with a 10% death rate, it's not even that. Let's say it's a 0.5%, it's not that many. But when you talk about hundreds of thousands of people being infected, that number goes up pretty significantly. Even if it's a 0.1%, that's still a lot of people, okay? So it's all numbers. So anyway, do your due diligence out there. Stay home if you can. If you do go out, great, that's okay. Keep your distance going to the grocery store. But heed the CDC, heed your county. I don't think these are overreactions. It's better to get out in front of this and slow it down now. I would much rather have 2 weeks of kind of everybody just hanging out and not doing anything. Yes, we got to cancel stuff and be done with it, because I suspect if we don't do this and kind of follow these rules and guidelines, it's going to be a lot longer and we're going to have a lot more massive issues from that. So that's my thoughts today. They could change based on how the data changes, right? Nothing wrong with changing your mind whenever you get more data from that. So I'm going to look at things maybe next week and see how things are going. All right, guys, I hope this has helped. Please go check your local and state and, of course, federal websites to see kind of the best way to approach this, what your county's doing. And again, everybody just needs to relax a little bit and take it easy. All right, guys, thanks.